This seminar is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Consult with your medical provider for medical advice or treatment. Although the presenters try to keep the information in this seminar as accurate and timely as possible, the speakers and Mather Hospital assume no duty to ensure the seminar is error-free. The speakers and Mather Hospital are not responsible or liable for any claim, loss, or damage resulting from you viewing this seminar.
Thank you for joining us today for our HealthyU webinar series on nutrition through the ages. Please enter any questions you may have using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many as we can within the time allotted towards the end of the presentation. I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Barbara Broggleworth. Barbara is a graduate of Queens College, where she earned a Bachelor of Science in Food and Nutrition and completed her dietetic internship at Stony Brook University, Department of Family Medicine. She is continuing her studies at Stony Brook University, earning a master's degree in nutrition. Barbara's passion for helping people by meeting them where they are, along with her education as a registered dietitian, makes her well suited to be part of such a unique and patient-centered practice at the Bariatric Center of Excellence at Mather Hospital. Helping others find wellness through balanced nutrition, physical fitness, and a healthy lifestyle is central to Barbara's work. Barbara?
Thank you, Emily. So when I was asked to speak about nutrition through the ages, I was excited because it provides us with a different lens to view nutrition. It's been my experience that when people think of nutrition, the word diet comes to mind and that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. But that's not true. Nutrition through the ages reminds us that we are dynamic, that we're always changing, and that our needs as human beings are going to change over our lifespan. So I thought it would be fun to let's define nutrition. Let's start from the ground up because there's so much misinformation out there. So the medical definition of nutrition is as follows. It's the process of taking in food and using it for growth, metabolism, and repair. Nutritional stages include things like ingestion, digestion, absorption, transport, assimilation, and excretion. So did you know that nutrition starts in the mouth? It's actually a process called mastication, and that's when we chew our food. It's broken down into small pieces, and then we have some enzymes in our saliva that help to break it down even further. It travels down through our esophagus, where it lands in the stomach. And a lot of people think of the stomach as just a repository for food, but there's actually a lot of mechanical action that's going on to break down the food. There's a lot of enzymes and proteins and hormones that are in the lining of our stomach that help to facilitate absorption. There's a lot of hydrochloric acid that helps us to absorb certain nutrients like iron and calcium, both like a very acidic environment. And then once that food gets broken down and it turns into kind of a liquid form, it goes into our small intestine. And in our small intestine, that's where all the nutrients are absorbed. So this is where our vitamins and minerals and the proteins that were broken down to amino acids, the carbohydrates that were broken down to glucose, they all get absorbed through the small intestine. So no absorption takes place in the large intestine. Once food gets to the large intestine, that's where, when all the nutrients have been extracted out of it, then it's really just a transit so we can excrete whatever we don't need. Our liver decomposes digestive food that's been sent from the small intestine. It synthesizes it, it packages up into packages, and then it puts it into the bloodstream. So the liver and the bloodstream work together for absorption and assimilation. Now, a lot of us spend so much time berating ourselves and thinking that we don't look perfectly. You know, we're basing everything on what our current culture tells us we're supposed to be. So we never feel like we're enough, right? But as human beings, we're amazingly complex organisms, right? And the beautiful thing about nutrition is that the food choices today affect and impact our health today, tomorrow, and in the future. Now, our bodies are so complex, we can do things like we can think, we can walk, we can talk, we can repair, we can move, we can grow, we can make a baby, we can play the piano, we can do all of this at the same time, most of us not even thinking about it. We don't have to remind our lungs to take a breath. We don't have to remind our heart to beat. We don't have to remind most of us don't have to remind us to move our legs when we go to get up, right? If those things are working perfectly for most of us, we take that completely for granted. So I want to take a step back and let's just look at nutrition from how it can support all of those activities that are happening in our body. So a lot of people think of the word diet, right? And automatically you think about deprivation. But diet is really just a dietary pattern. It's just what we're eating and what we're consuming. And the idea of following sensible nutrition is eating for our health and well-being. It's not about deprivation, guys. It's about nourishing our body so that we can function at our best. And there's something called nutrient-dense foods. So let me take one step back for a second. I like to use terms like nutrient-dense and calorie-dense when I'm talking to my patients about food because it's very objective. It takes all of the judgment out of it. But a lot of people don't know what a nutrient-dense food is. Nutrient-dense food is defined as something that's not going to give us a large amount of calories, but it's going to offer us a lot of nutrients, right? So I always think of an apple, because, you're going to get like maybe 120 calories out of an apple, but you're going to get vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and all these wonderful things. You're going to get fiber that's going to fill us up. That would be a nutrient-dense food. Compare that now to a calorie-dense food. So a calorie-dense food would be something like a piece of chocolate cake. It's not a bad food. It just happens to be a calorie-dense food because it's not offering us a lot of nutrients, but it is giving us a lot of calories. So if you think about them in comparison, imagine that you have a bowl of 5 apples on a table and a piece of chocolate cake. Well, that's probably the equivalent caloric-wise, right? 5 apples would be about 500 calories. Who can eat 5 apples in one sitting? We can't. Our bodies weren't made to. So nutrient-dense foods, they bolster our immune system. They provide energy for us for our daily tasks. They support our body when we're under stressful conditions. They help us to repair and rebuild daily. It helps to boost our moods. It helps us to maintain a healthy weight, helps to reduce blood pressure, helps to manage or prevent type 2 diabetes, and also prevents certain types of cancer. Excuse me one second. Sorry, guys. I didn't know my phone was on. Prevents type 2 diabetes, and prevents cancer. So our nutrient profile is broken up into categories. We have our macronutrients and we have micronutrients. Macronutrients are the 3 main suppliers of nutrients in our diet. There's 3 main categories, right? We've all heard of these: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And when we eat, we're advised to consume a balance of those, right? We don't have to go low carb or, I can't tell you how many people I've had sit in front of me and say, is it okay to have watermelon? Like, I thought that had too much sugar. No, let's have the fruits. Let's have the vegetables. Let's have the healthy protein, but let's have it in a balance. So what should we eat and why should we eat it? So we said we want to consume nutrient-dense foods, right? And it's going to include the following macro and micronutrients. So our macros are our complex carbohydrates, our high-quality proteins, and our heart-healthy fats. That would be the example of a nutrient-dense macronutrient as opposed to a calorie-dense macronutrient, right? Which would be a refined carbohydrate or a low-quality protein or a saturated fat. And it would also include foods that naturally have vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, and those are considered our micronutrients because we need them in a very small amount. So if we look at our macros one by one, let's start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get a bad rap, right? Everybody's doing the low carb thing. It's not that carbohydrates are bad, but certain carbohydrates contain a lot of calories for a very small amount, and we'll talk about that. But let's start with the role of carbohydrates in our diet. It's the main source of fuel or energy for our bodies, right? Our brain only runs on glucose. So as a matter of fact, our brain uses 20% of our daily energy intake. Carbohydrates are the preferred energy source for the brain, and the recommended daily allowance of carbohydrates is actually based on the amount of carbohydrates the brain needs to function. Exercise and physical activity. We've all heard of carb loading, right? Carbohydrates are the most important form of fuel for exercise and sports activities. It's a quick energy source, and the body can store carbohydrates in our muscles and in our liver so that we can call upon that and use it for fuel during physical activity. Whole food sources of carbohydrates provide an efficient source of energy, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. Now, there's categories of carbohydrates. We've got simple and we've got complex. So simple provide us with quick, short energy sources. And they would be things like fruit juice, soda and candy, dairy products. And then we have our complex, which are slow, steady energy sources. Things like whole grains, starchy veggies, beans and lentils. All of those are very nutrient-dense foods and provide us with lots of great nutrients and also tons of fiber. And all of those things help keep our body functioning at its best. And a lack of adequate glucose can result in things like weakness and dizziness, low blood glucose, which is also known as hypoglycemia, decreased performance, physical and mental fatigue. So I think most of us have heard the term the keto flu. It's because you're depriving your body of a source that it really needs for energy. Where is carbohydrates found in the diet? It's found everywhere. And what should that tell us? That tells us is that if a food is ubiquitous in a large amount throughout a lot of different foods, that as a species, we probably evolved to need that food, right? So let's look at some places it comes from. We've got our complex starches. That's going to be our whole grains, our brown rice, our quinoa, our legumes, our beans, our starchy vegetables. They're complex. Think of it kind of like a rope, right? So a complex starch, if you can imagine that the rope has a lot of different knots in it, and that our body has to work hard to break down all of those knots, and the knots are the fiber. So that complex starch stays in our stomach longer, and it promotes something called slowed gastric emptying. And what that means is it stays in there longer, which means it keeps us fuller longer. They have a lot of fiber, right? Fiber also is good because it promotes regularity, right? So complex starches include the kind of fiber that we need to keep us regular, right? To keep food moving through that colon. Now we've got our milk and milk products. Did you know that they had a carbohydrate value? They do, because they contain something called lactose, right? Anything with an ose at the end of it means that it's a sugar. So milk and milk products would provide the equivalent, like 1 cup of milk would provide the equivalent of about 15 grams of carbohydrate. Again, a very nutrient-dense food, a very efficient source of calcium, but it has a carbohydrate value. Fruits and vegetables also have a carbohydrate value. Are they bad? Not at all. Tons of antioxidants and vitamins and minerals in our fruits and vegetables. We also get a lot of fiber there, different kinds of fiber that we need to keep us fuller longer. Fiber, by the way, just as a quick side note, one of my favorite things about fiber is that we as human beings don't have the enzyme to break it down, but the bacteria in our colon do. So fiber becomes a prebiotic, right, for that healthy bacteria. It can eat that, and then it can grow, and that's what we want, to have, a healthy gut flora. So fiber is really key And all of these natural foods that are abundant in fiber are going to promote that. Refined starches, on the other hand, because they don't have fiber and they do digest very quickly, they can add to the bad bacteria in our gut, but also they can put on weight fast. And one of the reasons is a little bit complex, but it has to do with our way our body produces insulin, right? So remember that rope I was talking about where it had a lot of knots in it, took us a long time to break down? Because it slows gastric emptying, it also doesn't spike our blood sugar, right? Doesn't spike, and so it doesn't promote insulin. But when we eat something like white bread or mashed potatoes or cookies or pastry or candy or fruit juice, those things are going to get absorbed rapidly, right? So they go into the small intestine and immediately goes into our blood, right? Do we want glucose in our blood? No, that would promote diabetes, right? So insulin comes to the rescue, right? Our pancreas is in the background. It squeezes, it produces this big burst of insulin that comes to the rescue, and it's going to usher that glucose out of there. But where is it going to put it? Well, insulin is a storage hormone. It's known as a growth hormone. So it's going to store that extra energy in our adipose tissue, which is a fancy way of saying our fat cells that are waiting there in the wings, very happy to receive this stored form of energy. So just to recap, refined starches are quickly absorbed and they turn into glucose. They can spike our insulin, which stores them quickly as fat. And complex carbohydrates take much longer to digest and have more nutrients. So protein, everybody knows about protein, right? It's like the superstar, everybody's talking about it. What does protein do? Well, it's a vital nutrient. It's the building blocks of our muscles, our organs, our blood, our skin, our hair, our nails. Next to water, it's the most plentiful substance in the human body. And the entire body, we're made of protein, right? It's responsible for growth, for repair, for maintenance of body tissue. It strengthens our immune system. And it also promotes satiety, which means it keeps us fuller longer, right? It suppresses that hunger hormone, ghrelin, think ghrelin, right? Protein suppresses that. So when people go on these quote unquote high protein diets, one of the reasons why they work is because it keeps them fuller for a longer period of time. So in essence, they're just consuming less calories. Now let's talk about dietary fats. Dietary fats get a bad rap. Now, back in the 1970s, the Physicians Committee had approached Congress and they said, look guys, we've got a public health problem going on. I've got so many people showing up in our doctor's offices that have cardiovascular disease. And we think that fat, particularly saturated fat, is the culprit of all of this. So we want to get the message out to everybody through the USDA saying not to consume a lot of fat. So fast forward into the 80s and 90s, and I think most of us can remember Snackwell's cookies, right? So everything was fat-free, and fat became the demon, and nobody wanted to have it. It's not that fat is bad, right? It's just that fat is very calorie-dense for a small amount. So let me give you an idea of what that looks like. If you were to look at from a calorie perspective, if you were to take carbohydrates, it's about 4 calories per gram, right? And if you were to look at protein, again, 4 per gram. Now, if you look at fat, it's 9. So it's double the amount. So we need less of it. But the role of dietary fats in our diet is important. It protects our organs. It insulates our body in the cold. It helps our body to absorb certain nutrients. It helps us to produce important hormones. It's a stored form of energy that we can call upon if we're in a state of starvation or if we're sick. It acts as messengers. It helps proteins do their job. It's the start of chemical reactions that help to control things like growth, immune function, and reproduction. It's important and we need it. So we shouldn't be eliminating fat, but we should be conscious of the kind of fat that we consume. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So this can get very, very convoluted, right? There's types of fat in the diet. We've got saturated fat, we've got trans fat, we've got monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. So the ones that we want to really stay away from are trans fats. And that's because that's a manufactured fat, right? Think about margarine. You know, back in the day, food scientists thought that they were doing a great thing if they were to take a fat that was liquid at room temperature and add some hydrogen ions to that, which hydrogenizes the fat, right? Turns it into a trans fat, and our body doesn't necessarily know what to do with that. So we don't want trans fats. Saturated fats, that's like our butter, right? So it's a natural fat, and it's also in, you know, like red meat, that's the marbling. It should be consumed in trace amounts because saturated fats are not liquid at room temperature, and they're known to, you know, contribute to things like cardiovascular disease. Then we have our monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Those are the guys that are liquid at room temperature. So think olive oil, your vegetable oils, right? So the bad, quote unquote, bad fats tend to be more solid at room temperature, and our good fats tend to be more liquid. Vitamins and minerals. You know, I think that vitamins and minerals and the whole supplement industry has taken over, and I think we've become deaf to it, and we don't consider the importance or the role of these vitamins and minerals. And if we do, we either over supplement, we don't necessarily consider the most appropriate source to get it from. So let's talk about what they are. They're called micronutrients because they're required by the body in relatively small amounts to support many body processes. So if you look at this diagram here, you'll see that, I mean, it's very, very hard to read, but B1 is thiamine. Thiamine is ubiquitous in a lot of our foods, you know, so mostly in our grains, and our cereals, our breads, pork. Vitamin B2, that's riboflavin. Vitamin A, we know that we need that for our beta carotene, for eye function, things like that. Calcium for strong bones. We've got our iron for blood. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but you could see that these vitamins and minerals, they're considered, scientifically, they're considered cofactors. And basically what they do is they make the processes in our body run a lot more efficiently. And we need the right mix of nutrients for good health. So we need our micronutrients actually help our body use our macronutrients. So I don't know if you knew this, but vitamin B1, which is also thiamine, helps the body to convert carbohydrates into energy. So some examples of what vitamins and minerals do: blood pressure regulation. So what minerals would be involved in that? That's sodium and potassium, right? This is sodium potassium pump. It helps to regulate our blood pressure rather. Muscle contraction. That's where calcium comes in, and also vitamin B1. Nervous system function, another role of vitamin B1. Brain function, digestion, growth and development, heart function, hormone production, immune function, wound healing. Did you know that the two micronutrients that are used in wound healing are zinc and vitamin C, and they're also used in conjunction with each other. Vitamin C, by the way, builds collagen, which helps keep our skin beautiful. So we don't need to consume collagen, but if we do consume a lot of vitamin C in its whole food source, it's going to provide us, going to keep our skin looking great. As a matter of fact, vitamin C is so important for collagen regrowth that they actually give it in very high doses to people that are in burn units in the hospital. We know red blood cell formation. What do we think of? We think of iron, we think of B12. Taste and smell, again, that zinc, vision, we think of beta carotene, vitamin A. So you can see that there are so many different roles, and that the vitamins and minerals, when they are in their whole food form, they're in all of our fruits and vegetables. So dietitians sound like a broken record when we say eat the rainbow of fruits and vegetables, but that's because that's what's going to give you all those great nutrients, micronutrients. And water. Water has a role in the body. What does water do for us? It forms saliva, so it helps us with digestion, right? It's needed by the brain to manufacture hormones and neurotransmitters. It keeps our mucosal membranes moist. It regulates our body temperature when we're sweating and respiration. It allows us, sorry, my computer keeps going. Allows our body cells to grow, to reproduce, and survive. It flushes body waste, mainly in our urine. It lubricates our joints. It's the major component of most of our body parts. And an unknown fact, and as dietitians, we talk about this stuff a lot because people come to us, how do I relieve constipation? Well, what they don't know is, one of our first answers is how much water are you taking in, right? And as a general rule, we want to look for, 8-ounce glasses, 64 ounces of water. But how that works in the body is kind of interesting. Remember when I was saying that our nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine? Well, when all of those nutrients are being pulled out, water's coming out too, right? So that forms that mass that's passing through and that gets down into our large intestine, our colon. Well, there's an area in our large intestine during that transit time that pulls water back in to moisten it so that we can pass it easily. If we're not taking in enough water, then that process may not work very efficiently. So it's usually one of the first things that we talk about. And then fiber, right? We talk about fiber with constipation, but the two have to go together. Water helps to convert food to components that are needed for digestion, for our survival. And it also helps to deliver oxygen all over our body, right? So when we're exercising and they tell us to drink while we're exercising, it's because it's going to get the oxygen to the muscles. And guess what, guys? That's going to make the muscles hurt less, right? Because we're delivering oxygen, and oxygen is going to be the fuel source for the muscle. So water, even though it's not providing us any calories or necessarily nutrients per se, it's very, very important for us. Okay, so now let's get into what I was talking about earlier, nutrition through the ages, right? So remember I was saying that we're dynamic and we're always changing as we go through our lifespan. So as do our nutrition requirements change. So for infants, well, of course, we know that breastfeeding is recommended because that's going to help boost their immune system and give them lots of vitamins and nutrients that we can't necessarily manufacture in a formula. It's not to say that formula is bad, but breastfeeding is always going to be recommended over that. They supplement with vitamin D. They require 3 times the protein needs than adults do, and they require 4 times the amount of vitamin D and calcium than adults do. Nutrition for adolescents. Well, we've got girls and boys, right? So girls go through a growth spurt at around the age of 12 and boys around the age of 14. They have an increased need for calories and nutrients because they're growing so rapidly, right? They're banking their calcium at this stage. That means that, when you go from an infant to about 21 or 22 years old, all the calcium that you take in, it gets deposited in our bones, right? So we're banking it. So it's really important to aim for at least 3 1-cup servings of low-fat, calcium-rich foods daily. They also need protein-rich foods daily, like meat, poultry, and fish. They need whole grains for energy, so you want to aim for approximately 6 ounces of grains daily. Iron-rich foods. Boys double their lean body mass between the ages of 10 and 17, needing iron to support their growth. And girls need it because they have to replace the blood that they lose through menstruation. Women of childbearing age. This is a whole subset, right? Now your needs are definitely changing because you're supporting another life. So a pregnant woman needs more calcium, more folic acid, more iron, and more protein than a woman who's not expecting. And that's according to the American College of the ACOG. So iron. Pregnant women need about 27 milligrams of iron a day, which is double the amount needed by women who are not expecting. They need more protein because they have to, build the organs for the baby. They need more calcium. Pregnant women should aim for 3 to 4 servings of dairy per day to meet their needs. And they need folic acid. That's required to prevent neural tube defects. It's naturally present and abundant in fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, but it's also always included in a prenatal vitamin. Now, nutrition for elder adults. So as we get older, our metabolism can decrease by 15 to 20%, and that can be that is due to something called sarcopenia, or reduced muscle mass. And that decreases the need for energy intake, right? Our metabolism is what we're burning at rest. So if that number is going to decrease because we're losing some of that lean muscle mass, then we have to or should accommodate for that. Our carbohydrate needs may be reduced because they may be impacted by conditions like type 2 diabetes. Our protein needs are different. They may increase due to either illness or loss of lean muscle mass and a decrease in appetite. We want to aim to reduce saturated fat because we're at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. We want to focus on healthier fats like olive oil. Calcium. The supplement may be recommended to compensate for age-related bone loss. So remember what I was saying before about adolescents where they're banking their calcium? That stops at about 22 years of age, right? So what happens is calcium is needed at 1% in our blood at all times. It's important for our heart function, our muscle contraction. So if we don't take in enough calcium orally, our body is really efficient about taking the calcium by breaking down our bones. And that's what puts us at risk. So if we're getting it from our calcium-rich foods, and dairy is a very efficient way of getting calcium, as is calcium-set tofu, you can do it. You can take it as a supplement if it's recommended by your doctor. And iron. There's also a deficiency often seen in elderly people, and I didn't put it on the slide, but B12 is as well. So sometimes they supplement with iron and B12. So to kind of sum everything up, I had contemplated putting dietary patterns on here, and the ones that came to my mind were things like the DASH diet, right? That's from the American Heart Association. It's the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. Or the MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. But all of those things have something in common, right? They add a fruit or a vegetable to every meal and every snack. They have lots of healthy greens and vegetables, and you can do that by having a green salad or a vegetable-based soup, plus one other vegetable a day. You could add frozen berries to oatmeal or yogurt in the morning, or to a smoothie, and add fish twice a week. And by following those really, really simple guidelines, you would be meeting your nutrient needs. And not overdoing it. And guess what? If you're eating that way consistently throughout the day, because those foods are so nutrient dense, you're less likely to have any room to consume anything else, right? Because all of those things are promoting satiety for the reasons that we discussed. So that's it for the presentation. I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for your extremely informative presentation. That was great. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're going to try and answer as many as we can, but if your question did not get answered, please email us at matherhospital@northwell.edu so we can have Barbara answer it, and we'll get back to you. Okay. Will you be discussing nutrition for vegetarians who are older?
So, that's a good question. So nutrition for vegetarians. Vegetarians, as you get older, because protein is so important, it's important to consume a variety of grains and legumes And also things like tofu would be very appropriate to meet your protein needs adequately as a vegetarian. Some people who follow a vegetarian diet, sometimes they tend to overconsume on refined carbohydrates, and that can work against you. So nutrition for vegetarians in particular, I just want to make a note that plant-based diets, particularly vegetarian diets, are known to even reverse heart disease. We have cells that line the inside of our arteries, and they're called epithelial cells. And when we're young and, like when we're infants, they're all beautifully smooth. But as we age, they can kind of get out of place or get a little damaged. And so what we know about fruits and vegetables is that they repair epithelial cells, and it improves our cardiovascular health.
How much vitamin D should we take in, and from what source?
So vitamin D is one of those things that's not really abundant in our food supply. And as people who live in a northern climate, most of us tend to be deficient in vitamin D. And I'm not going to answer that question with a number because that would be a blanket statement and it's not one size fits all. So if you're deficient, depending on where you are in that deficiency, how low you are, is going to depend on what your doctor is going to recommend for you to supplement.
Not everyone can consume dairy products. What can you eat instead for these sources?
So foods that contain a lot of calcium, it's very abundant in leafy greens, and calcium set tofu is also another source. There are foods that if you're not consuming dairy that can be fortified with calcium. I think they do that with a lot of plant-based milks nowadays. So you can look for something that's fortified with calcium and vitamin D.
Fish products aren't very easy for me to have. Are there any other recommendations to add to a diet in a week?
So the reason why, and I didn't touch on this in the presentation, but the reason why they recommend fish is because certain types of fish are very high in a particular type of fat called omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-3 fatty acids are important because they help our body to control inflammation, right? They're considered anti-inflammatory, so they're good for our health. So other sources of omega-3 fatty acids, it can be found in things like flax seeds. The problem is that our body doesn't convert it to the type that we need very efficiently, so we would need a lot more of it. You can take a fish oil supplement, but you need to get clearance from your doctor to do that because fish oil can thin your blood. So I'm very cautious about recommending supplements in a blanket format like this. You have to get clearance from your doctor first, but that would be an alternative.
And then we have another question. What supplements should be taken? But I'd assume, is that kind of personal? Oh.
So I don't want to get on a soapbox on this one, but let me start by saying that supplements are not regulated by the FDA. Let me say that again. Supplements are not regulated by the FDA. That means that they can say whatever they want on the outside of that label. They can tell you that there's 100 milligrams of vitamin C in that multivitamin, and they don't have to prove that it's there. So what I say to people that do supplement is be informed. There is a website, it's a third-party review website, it's called Consumer Labs. It's been out since the 1990s, and it was started by a doctor who was frustrated by the fact that, supplements were taking over, and, it's a very, very expensive industry, right? So Consumer Labs looks at not all of the products, but they do have a very, very broad database. They talk about the evidence behind that particular supplement. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to take turmeric. They would talk about the evidence for turmeric as an anti-inflammatory, and they would evaluate sources. Now, I want to note something that's very powerful about turmeric here. Turmeric, a lot of our supplements are sourced by either China or India, right? And turmeric is sold by weight, and it's the exact same color as lead. And there was a recall on turmeric because the one that was being imported from China was actually contaminated with lead. So when you look at the supplements that are on this Consumer Labs website, they actually evaluate, does that product have any arsenic or any heavy metals? So when you think about that, you scratch your head like, maybe I should just get these vitamins and minerals from the food supply instead of supplementing. Now, maybe your doctor tells you should supplement with vitamin D. That's okay. He's going to make a recommendation for you. But in terms of an abundance of supplementation, like I said, some people take omega-3 fatty acids because they don't eat a lot of fish. If it's recommended by their doctor, that's okay. A probiotic is okay to supplement with. Just get clearance that you can do it, number one, and two, be smart about it. The name of the website is Consumer Labs.
Okay, we'll leave the box open for any other questions. Oh, the one question says, will you send us a link to view this presentation? All past HealthyU webinars are placed on the website, matherhospital.org/HealthyU. All pre-recorded content will be there. This will be there as well. We'll leave it open for one more minute. We got, thank you, Barbara. This was great.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. When you guys exit the webinar, just be aware a link will pop up to complete a survey. It's very short, and your feedback is extremely important to us. So thank you for virtually joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.